Oh, the New York Jets. Sometimes a fun organization to make a punching bag out of because they've had a lot of years of mediocrity, a lot of years of incompetence, and a lot of years of suck. But ultimately, that's not what I'm here to talk about today with the New York Jets. I'm here to talk about the top 5 players in the history of the organization. You're welcome to chime in with your own list of the top 5 players in New York Jets history, and most importantly of all, let me know what you think of my list. Now, some of the honorable mentions, guys that had a good career with the organization, different reasons, different levels of good or great, but ultimately didn't make this list. I'll go to guys like Mark Gastineau and Ken O'Brien and Joe Klecko, Wayne Corbett, Al Toon, Matt Snell, Richard Todd, Freeman McNeil. These are some of the guys that stand out to me as some of the better players in the history of the New York Jets, but ultimately not good enough to crack a top 5 list. Yeah, the Jets have had some good players in the history, but not a lot of great ones. Ultimately, though, I've got my list of what I feel are the top 5 Jets of all time, so let's get started. Number 5, I will go to Don Maynard, a New York Titan original. They were the Titans before they were the Jets, and Don Maynard was an original member, a charter member of the franchise, if you will. And during his 13 years with the Jets organization, he was one of the best players on their team consistently and one of the best pass catching weapons in the old AFL. He was a 4-time AFL All Star, a 1-time AFL All Pro. He had 5 seasons of more than 1,000 yards receiving at a time where you weren't playing 16 games every year and at a time where you just didn't throw the ball as much in that era, even though the AFL did bombs away more than the old tried and true 3 yards in a cloud of dust NFL. He had 3 seasons of 10 or more touchdown catches, and he's also a member of the all time AFL team and a member of the Pro Football Hall of Fame. When you think back to those Titans and Jets teams of the 60s, and you think back to that Super Bowl III team, one of the big stars on that team was Don Maynard. There was another star on that team that I think actually goes a little higher on this list because I think, frankly, he was a little bit of a better player, but sadly hasn't gotten the same recognition in terms of the Hall of Fame, and that is Larry Grantham out of Ole Miss, who was another original New York Titan before they became the New York Jets. During his 13 years with the Jets, he was one of the premier players at his position, one of the premier defensive players at the linebacker position in the old AFL. He was a 5-time AFL All-Star, a 5-time AFL All-Pro. And again, when you talk about Larry Grantham, he was a guy that was a part of that Super Bowl III championship team, and a guy that I think maybe because he played for the Jets and not the Giants doesn't have a place in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, maybe more so because of the fact that he spent such a sizable portion of his career playing in the AFL that he has also been overlooked. And you could say that with a lot of these teams, with a lot of players over the years, and the fact that they played in the AFL. So a lot of these great players haven't gotten the call for the Hall of Fame that maybe, frankly, they should have. And I think Larry Grantham definitely fits into that category. Number 3, I will go with Kevin Mawae, who was with the team between 1998 and 2005. And during his time, he was perhaps the premier center in the National Football League. He was a 6-time Pro Bowler, a 2-time first-team All-Pro, a member of the 2000s NFL All-Decade team, and probably at some point in time will get his place in Canton and will probably, I would assume, go in as a New York Jet. So he will definitely be viewed as one of the greater Jets of all time at that point. But again, one of the better interior linemen, one of the better, if not the best centers in the league during his time, and one of the greatest Jets of all time, in my opinion. He was a part of some Jets teams that were able to run the ball relatively effectively with my number 2 guy on the list, Curtis, my favorite, Martin. I can't believe I just quoted Chris Berman and didn't make any jokes about him being a stumbling, bumbling, fumbling drunk. During Curtis Martin's 8 seasons with the organization, coming via the New England Patriots as a free agent, he really, was a guy that was the bedrock. He was that player for the Jets for many years. He was that one consistent, that one constant. 3-time Pro Bowler, 1-time All Pro. Again, I think somewhat criminally underrated. Now, granted, he is in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, but I don't think when people look at, some of the great running backs of all time, that Curtis Martin gets mentioned anywhere near where he should. This is a guy that had 7 straight 1,000-yard seasons. He once led the league in rushing yards. He's a guy, again, that It was just consistently good over a long period of time. He might not have ever had the flashes of true greatness or dominance, but there is something to be said about year in and year out, game after game, bringing it each and every single week. And that's what Curtis Martin did on some less than stellar Jets teams, frankly, especially towards the tail end of his time there. But I think the number one greatest New York Jet of all time has to be Joe Namath. Now, here was a guy that was an organization changer for the old New York Titans who became the New York Jets. The Jets needed something. They needed it. The AFL needed it. And Joe Namath brought it. He was the first overall pick out of Alabama in the 1965 AFL draft. The AFL and the New York Jets ownership made sure that Joe Namath came to the AFL. They needed what he brought to the table. They needed his star power. Now, you're talking about a guy that was a 5-time All-Star / Pro Bowler, a 1-time first-team All-Pro. He was, a 2-time AFL Player of the Year, member of the all-time AFL team, had the first ever 4,000-yard passing season in football history. He's a 3-time league leader in passing yards. He was a 4-time league leader in passing touchdowns. But statistics alone don't measure always the greatness of the player and the greatness and importance of the individual. And when you talk about the greatest players in an organization's history, sometimes when you start getting to the top, you have to sit there and kind of sort through, and it's not always the stats that are the biggest difference. It is those intangible things. It's those leadership things. It's those things of mark and impact on the organization. I don't think beyond question anybody could sit there and ever argue Joe Namath's impact on the New York Jets, the AFL, and the NFL as a whole, as a league, and as a brand. And what Joe Namath did in Super Bowl III by leading his team to a 16-7 victory over the old tried and true NFL marquee franchise, the Baltimore Colts, that was a game changer. Yes, the AFL NFL merger was already underway, but after the first 2 Super Bowls where the AFL teams and the Chiefs and the Raiders had both been beaten, and relatively convincingly at that, this was a chance for the AFL to stand their ground, the AFL to say, we can play too, the AFL to say, we are an equal league. We're not joining you. We are merging with you. We are combining, and we are your equals, and we are to be taken seriously. And the impact and meaning and significance of that, what Joe Namath said, you know what, I'm tired of this. We're going to win this game. I guarantee it. It's something that still reverberates to this day. And again, you're talking about a guy that embraced playing in New York. He embraced the New York scene. He was New York perhaps as much as any athlete there has ever been. And to this day, when people think of the New York Jets, what is the one player that they always think of? For whatever reason, it's always Broadway Joe Willie Namath, period. And beyond question, because of his greatness at his position, his impact, meaning, and significance to his team, to his league, to the game of professional football as a whole, I think beyond question, Joe Namath is the greatest New York Jet of all time. And I doubt that anybody disputes that.